No one even heard her say please. The voice cut through the gray drizzle as the camera settled on a narrow city bus stop, where rain tapped softly against the metal bench and pooled along the cracked sidewalk, the kind of quiet, ordinary corner people pass without ever remembering. Except today something lingered there, something heavier than the weather. An elderly woman sat hunched forward, her thin coat damp at the shoulders, her hands trembling as they clutched a worn paper bag that sagged, like it had been carried too far for too long. Her breath came uneven, catching in her throat as if each inhale cost more than the last, and still the world moved around her at its usual pace. Cars sliding past at 30 miles per hour, tires hissing on wet asphalt, footsteps steady and indifferent, people wrapped in their own schedules, their own thoughts, their own invisible walls. A man in a tailored coat slowed just enough to glance before adjusting his collar and continuing on. A woman with a coffee cup paused half a second, then turned away as if looking too long might make her responsible. Even a group of teenagers nearby laughed loudly at something on a phone, their voices bright and careless, not cruel, just disconnected, the kind of distance that builds when pain doesn't belong to you. The old woman's lips parted again, a fragile sound slipping out, not loud enough to break through the city's rhythm, just a quiet, trembling please that dissolved into the rain before it could reach anyone. Her bag shifted suddenly. The bottom seemed tearing open with a soft rip that went unnoticed. A small bottle rolled free, tapping against the concrete before spinning slowly toward the curb. She watched it go, but didn't move to pick it up. As if the effort itself had become too much, her shoulders sagged further, her gaze dropping to the wet ground where reflections of passing headlights blurred and stretched, turning everything into streaks of cold light. For a moment, she closed her eyes, and the world seemed to pass right over her, like she had already faded from it, like she was something between presence and memory. And then, without announcement, without hesitation, a pair of worn sneakers stopped directly in front of her, not to stare, not to judge, just to stay. The girl who wore them didn't speak at first. She simply stood there, rain dotting the sleeves of her hoodie, her small frame still but certain, as if she had already made a decision no one else had even considered. Slowly, she crouched down until she was level with the woman, breaking the invisible line everyone else had kept, her hand reaching forward not abruptly, but with a quiet intention, fingers open, offering, waiting, and when they touched, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was just warm, steady, undeniable. The old woman flinched slightly at the contact, her eyes lifting in confusion more than fear, as if trying to understand why someone would cross that distance. The girl's voice came soft, almost blending with the rain. "It's okay. I'm here." And there was something in the way she said it. No pity, no hesitation, just presence, like those 3 words were enough to hold the moment together. Around them, the city didn't stop. Not yet. People still passed, still glanced, still chose not to see. But something had shifted in that small space, something quiet but unbreakable. The girl adjusted her stance, sitting beside the woman on the cold bench without asking permission, as if the act itself was natural, necessary, as if loneliness didn't get to decide who was allowed close. The old woman's grip tightened slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you help me?" And the girl didn't look away, didn't overthink. She just answered the only truth she had. "Because you looked like you needed someone." Simple, direct, enough. And for the first time since the rain began, the woman's breathing slowed, just a little, just enough to be noticed. Her shoulders easing as if the weight pressing down on them had shifted by an inch, not gone, but shared. And though no one around them fully understood it yet, that single moment, that single choice, had already begun to change something far bigger than either of them could see. The rain softened into a thin mist that clung to everything, turning the streetlights into hazy halos, and for a while neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence itself felt necessary, like something fragile was settling between them, and neither wanted to break it. The girl kept her hand steady, her thumb lightly brushing against the older woman's knuckles in a slow, unconscious rhythm, the kind people use to calm a child. Except this time it was grounding someone who had been left alone far too long. The old woman's breathing grew more even, though every now and then it caught again, As if memories were rising without permission, her gaze drifted down to the torn paper bag at her feet, and she let out a small, embarrassed sigh. "I made a mess," she murmured, her voice thin but clearer than before. The girl followed her eyes and leaned forward without hesitation, reaching down to gather the scattered items: a prescription bottle, a folded envelope, a photograph that had soaked through at the edges. She handled each one carefully, placing them back into the bag as if they mattered, because to her they did. When she picked up the photograph, she paused for a second, her brow softening. "Is this you?" she asked gently, holding it up just enough for the woman to see. The image showed a younger version of her standing in front of a piano, surrounded by children, all smiling wide. The kind of moment frozen in time that once meant everything. The old woman's lips trembled slightly before she nodded. "That was a long time ago," she said, her voice carrying both warmth and distance, like she was remembering a different life entirely. The girl studied the picture for a moment longer before slipping it back into the bag, not asking more, not pushing, just acknowledging it. Nearby, a man slowed his steps, glancing over again, this time not as quickly, curiosity beginning to replace indifference. A woman across the street lingered under an awning, watching quietly. Something about the scene no longer easy to ignore. The girl adjusted the bag on the bench and turned back. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, simple, open. The old woman shook her head slowly. "No. I was supposed to go somewhere." She hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the girl's hand. "But I do not think they want me there anymore." The words hung in the damp air, heavier than the rain. The girl did not react with shock or pity. She just nodded once, as if she understood more than she said. "Then we will figure out somewhere better," she replied, calm, certain, like it was already decided. The old woman blinked, caught off guard by the confidence in such a small voice. "You do not even know me," she whispered, and the girl gave a small shrug, her expression steady. "I know. You should not be out here alone," she answered, and for a moment the world seemed to slow around them again, not stopping, but shifting, like something invisible had been acknowledged out loud. The wind picked up slightly, brushing past them with a cooler edge, and the girl instinctively moved a little closer, shielding the older woman from it without making a show of it. Across the street, the woman under the awning took a step forward, hesitated, then stopped again, unsure of her place in what was unfolding, and still, the girl did not look around, did not seek approval. She simply stayed, present, grounded, her hand never leaving the others, as if that one connection was enough to hold everything else together. And in that quiet persistence, something deeper began to form, something that was no longer just about stopping for a stranger, but about refusing to let her disappear again. The air shifted again, not louder, not brighter, just different, like something unseen had started to ripple outward from that bench, the kind of change that does not announce itself, but makes people hesitate mid-step. The man who had passed earlier slowed once more, this time long enough to notice the way the girl stayed seated in the rain, without checking her phone, without looking around for someone to validate her choice. He watched the way her hand remained steady, the way the older woman leaned ever so slightly toward her, as if that small point of contact had become an anchor. And for a brief second, something unsettled him, not guilt exactly, but a quiet question he could not ignore. Across the street, the woman under the awning finally stepped off the curb, her heels tapping lightly against the wet pavement, each step careful, uncertain, as if she was crossing into something she had no script for. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to hear the soft exchange, but not yet part of it. The girl noticed her presence but did not react, her focus still on the woman beside her. "Do you feel cold?" she asked gently, already shrugging off her hoodie before waiting for an answer. The motion was simple, almost automatic. She draped it over the older woman's shoulders, adjusting it slightly so it would not slip, the fabric too big, too warm, carrying the faint scent of laundry soap and something familiar, something human. The older woman closed her eyes for a moment as the warmth settled in, her fingers tightening again around the girl's hand, not out of fear this time, but something closer to relief. "I used to teach children how to listen," she said suddenly, her voice steadier now, as if the memory itself had given her something back. Not just music, but listening to each other. The girl tilted her head slightly, absorbing the words without interruption. They were always in a hurry to play the next note. The woman continued, a faint smile touching her lips. But I would tell them. The silence matters too. The girl nodded once, her eyes soft. I think you were right. She replied quietly, and that simple acknowledgement seemed to settle something deeper than either of them expected. Behind them, the man who had paused earlier stepped closer now, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, his voice lower than before, almost cautious. Do you need help getting somewhere? He asked, not to take over, not to interrupt, but to join. The woman under the awning followed, standing beside him, offering a small, folded umbrella without a word, placing it gently on the bench within reach. Neither of them pushed, neither of them rushed, they simply stayed. And the space that had once felt like an island of isolation began to expand, not crowded, not chaotic, just shared. The girl glanced briefly at them, then back to the older woman, her grip never loosening, as if she understood something they were only just beginning to see, that this moment was not about fixing everything at once. It was about not leaving, about choosing to remain present even when it would be easier to walk away. The older woman looked between the faces now around her, confusion giving way to something softer, something fragile but growing, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I disappeared, she admitted, and the girl shook her head gently, her answer immediate, certain. You did not disappear, she said, they just were not looking. And in the quiet that followed, no one moved to argue, no one turned away, because for the first time, they were all looking. The small circle around the bench held steady, not growing louder, not drawing attention, just existing with a quiet weight that felt unfamiliar to everyone standing there, the kind of stillness that asked for patience instead of action. The man who had first spoken shifted his stance slightly, glancing at the older woman before lowering himself just enough to be closer to her level, not sitting, not imposing, just meeting her where she was. Do you have somewhere warm to go tonight? He asked, his voice careful, like he understood that the answer might carry more than just direction. The older woman hesitated, her fingers tightening again around the girl's hand, the fabric of the hoodie slipping slightly as the wind brushed past. She adjusted it unconsciously, holding onto the warmth like it might disappear if she did not. I was told I had a room, she said slowly, her words measured. But when I got there, they said it was not mine anymore. Her voice did not break, but something in it hollowed, like the space behind the words had already been emptied out. The woman with the umbrella inhaled softly, her brows drawing together. That should not happen, she murmured, almost to herself. But she did not step forward to take control. She simply stayed close, listening. The girl tilted her head slightly, absorbing the information without judgment, her response immediate and grounded. Then we will not send you back there, she said, as if the solution was already clear. The simplicity of it cut through the uncertainty in a way that made the others pause, because while they were calculating options, logistics, possibilities, she had already chosen a side. The older woman looked at her, searching her face for hesitation, for doubt, but found none, only a quiet certainty that did not demand proof. You speak like you know what to do, she whispered, and the girl gave a small shrug, her gaze steady. I just know you should not be alone, she answered, and again, that answer settled deeper than expected. The man nodded slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket, not to distract himself, but to help. There is a shelter a few blocks from here. They might have space, he offered, but the girl shook her head gently before he could finish, not dismissing him, just redirecting. Maybe, she said, but not tonight. Her tone soft but firm, as if she understood something beyond availability, beyond convenience, that sometimes safety was not just a place, it was a person staying. The woman with the umbrella stepped closer now, placing it fully into the older woman's hands, closing her fingers around the handle. You can keep this, she said quietly, her voice warmer than before, less unsure. The older woman looked down at it, then back up, her expression shifting, not quite trust, not yet relief, but something beginning to open, something that had been closed off for too long. The girl adjusted her position slightly on the bench, her shoulder now lightly touching the older woman's arm, grounding, present, unmovable, and in that contact, the older woman's posture changed, just a little, her back straightening, her breathing deepening, like she was remembering how to exist in a space where she was not ignored, where she was not pushed aside. The streetlights flickered faintly as the mist thinned, revealing clearer outlines of the people standing there, no longer just passers-by, but witnesses, participants, and though none of them said it out loud, they all felt it. The moment had shifted from observation to responsibility, from distance to presence, and at the center of it all, the girl remained still, her hand still holding the older woman's, as if letting go was not even an option, as if this simple connection was the one thing that mattered most. And, for the first time that night, the older woman did not look like someone waiting to be overlooked again. She looked like someone being seen. The moment did not rush forward. It deepened, settling into something steady and real as the damp air cooled against their skin. The street no longer just a place people pass through, but a quiet stage where something human was unfolding without permission or planning. The girl shifted slightly, adjusting her grip not because it was slipping, but because she wanted it to feel secure, intentional. The older woman's fingers no longer trembling as much, her breathing now slower, fuller, like she was relearning a rhythm she had forgotten. The man glanced at the girl again, this time not with uncertainty, but with a kind of respect he did not quite know how to express. "What is your name?" he asked gently, directing the question to the older woman. Giving her space to answer on her own terms, she hesitated for only a moment before replying. "Margaret," the name landing softly, as if it had not been spoken out loud in a while. The girl's face brightened just slightly, not with excitement, but recognition. "Margaret," she repeated quietly, anchoring it, making it real again. "I am Nia," she added. The introduction simple but important, turning a moment into a connection. The woman with the umbrella nodded faintly, as if something about hearing their names made the situation feel less distant, more grounded. Margaret looked between them, her eyes clearer now, not searching for an exit but beginning to take in the presence around her. "I used to tell my students that names matter," she said, her voice carrying a faint echo of the teacher she once was. "They remind us we are still here." Nia nodded once, absorbing the meaning without needing explanation. "You are still here," she said softly, not correcting, not emphasizing, just stating it like a fact that could not be argued. The words settled over Margaret like warmth, deeper than the hoodie draped over her shoulders, and for a brief second, her lips curved into something close to a smile, small, fragile, but unmistakably there. The man exhaled slowly, glancing down the street as if considering next steps, but his urgency had softened, replaced by something more patient, more aligned with the pace of the moment. "We can figure out where to go from here," he said, not directing, not deciding, just offering. Nia did not respond immediately, her attention still centered on Margaret, reading her in the quiet way she had been since the beginning. "Can you stand?" she asked gently, her tone careful, not assuming. Margaret nodded faintly, though uncertainty lingered in the movement. Nia shifted forward, rising slowly but keeping one hand firmly connected, giving Margaret something to follow rather than forcing her to lead. As Margaret stood, her legs wavered slightly, but she did not pull away, her weight leaning just enough into Nia's steady presence to stay balanced. The woman with the umbrella stepped closer, instinctively positioning herself on Margaret's other side, without making a show of it. A quiet support forming naturally. The man moved just ahead, glancing back once to make sure they were ready, not rushing them forward, just clearing a path through the thinning crowd. And as they began to move, it was not dramatic, not fast, just a few steps at a time, deliberate, grounded, the kind of movement that says we are going somewhere together, not leaving anyone behind. The rain had nearly stopped now, leaving only a damp sheen across the pavement that reflected the streetlights in long, quiet streaks, and in that reflection, four figures moved slowly forward, not strangers anymore, not disconnected, but tied together by something simple and rare, the choice to stop, to stay, to see. And as Margaret took another step, her grip on Nia's hand remained firm, not out of fear, but because for the first time in a long while, letting go did not feel like an option. They moved slowly along the sidewalk, not more than a few steps every couple of seconds, but each step felt intentional, grounded, as if the act of moving forward together mattered more than the destination itself. Margaret's hand remained wrapped around Nia's, her grip steady now, no longer clinging, but holding with quiet trust. The hoodie draped over her shoulders shifted slightly with each step, its warmth lingering against her skin like a reminder that she was not alone anymore. The city around them had not stopped. Cars still passed, distant horns still echoed, but something in the space immediately around them had softened, like a small pocket of calm had formed in the middle of everything else. The man walking ahead slowed near the corner, glancing back to make sure they were keeping pace. His movements less hurried than before, more aware, while the woman with the umbrella stayed close on Margaret's other side, her presence gentle but attentive, ready without imposing. Nia glanced up at Margaret briefly, reading her without words. "Are you tired?" she asked softly, her voice steady. Margaret considered the question, then nodded just once, not with defeat but honesty. "A little," she admitted, her voice carrying less strain now, more presence. Nia adjusted her step immediately, slowing just enough to match her rhythm, not dragging her forward, not pushing, simply aligning with her. And that small adjustment changed everything. It told Margaret she did not have to keep up, she only had to keep going. They reached the edge of the crosswalk, the signal blinking red. A few cars idling as the light prepared to change. The reflections of headlights stretched across the wet pavement, turning the street into a mirror of soft gold and white. They paused there together, not separated, not scattered, just waiting. Margaret looked down at their joined hands, her thumb brushing lightly over Nia's fingers as if confirming they were still there. "I used to walk my students across streets like this," she said quietly, her voice carrying a faint trace of memory. "I would tell them to stay close, to pay attention." She let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh. "I never thought I would be the one needing that." Nia glanced up at her, her expression calm, understanding. "Everyone needs someone sometimes," she replied simply, the words landing without weight, just truth. The signal changed with a soft click, the white walking figure lighting up, and they stepped forward together, one step, then another, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, halfway. Across, Margaret's pace faltered slightly, her balance shifting, and without a word, Nia tightened her grip just enough, anchoring her again, while the woman with the umbrella moved a fraction closer, creating a quiet support on both sides. The man ahead slowed even more, adjusting his pace to theirs, ensuring the path stayed clear. No one rushed them, no one honked. The moment held, fragile but intact, as they reached the other side. Margaret exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry more than just the crossing, something deeper, something released. They continued forward, the sidewalk stretching ahead under the dim glow of streetlights. And for the first time since the night began, Margaret's steps felt less uncertain, not because the road had changed, but because she was no longer walking it alone. The sidewalk stretched ahead in a long, quiet line, glistening under the streetlights as the last drops of rain clung to the air. And though the city still moved around them, something about their pace had begun to shape the space itself, slowing it, softening it, turning a simple walk into something more deliberate, more human. Margaret's steps grew steadier with each passing yard, not because her strength had returned all at once, but because she no longer felt like she had to carry herself alone. Nia stayed close at her side, her hand still firmly wrapped around Margaret's, her presence unwavering, not asking for recognition, not expecting anything in return, just there, fully, completely there. The man ahead glanced into a small diner on the corner, its warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk through fogged glass windows, the soft hum of conversation and the clink of silverware barely audible from outside. He paused, turning back toward them. "It is warm in there," he said, his voice gentle, not instructing, just offering. The woman with the umbrella followed his gaze, nodding slightly, her eyes flicking to Margaret as if waiting for her to decide. Margaret slowed her steps, looking toward the diner, the light reflecting in her eyes. Not just brightness, but possibility. She hesitated, her grip tightening slightly around Nia's hand. "I do not want to be a burden," she said quietly, the words automatic, learned from too many moments where she had been made to feel like one. Nia did not let go, did not rush to correct her. She simply looked up at Margaret with a calm, steady expression. "You are not," she said, her voice soft but certain. Not a reassurance, but a statement. Something grounded and immovable. The man stepped closer, opening the diner door just enough for the warmth to spill out further, the scent of coffee and something freshly baked drifting into the cool night air. "You can sit for a while," he added. "No one will mind." The woman with the umbrella offered a small smile, placing a hand lightly on Margaret's arm, not guiding, just present, and after a moment, Margaret nodded. Just once, a small decision that carried more weight than it seemed. They moved toward the entrance together, Nia stepping slightly ahead but never releasing her hand. The bell above the door chimed softly as they entered, the warmth wrapping around them instantly, the contrast so gentle it almost felt unreal. Margaret paused just inside, her shoulders lifting slightly as the chill left her, her breath settling into something more even, more natural. A few people inside glanced up briefly, curious but not intrusive, their attention returning quickly to their own conversations. The man guided them toward a booth near the window, sliding in first to make space, while the woman with the umbrella folded it neatly by the door, joining them quietly. Margaret eased herself into the seat, her movements slow but more confident now, as if the simple act of sitting somewhere warm had shifted something inside her. Nia sat beside her, still close, still connected, her hand resting lightly over Margaret's, not gripping now, just there, a presence rather than a hold. Margaret looked around the diner, taking in the soft light, the low murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of a place where people gathered without thinking twice. Her eyes lingered on a small table in the corner where a young child laughed softly, tapping a spoon against a glass. And for a moment, something in Margaret's expression changed again, not sadness, not even relief, but recognition, like she was remembering what it felt like to be part of a place like this. She turned slightly toward Nia, her voice quieter now, but clearer than it had been all night. "You did not have to stop for me," she said, not as a question, but as a truth she was still trying to understand. Nia met her gaze without hesitation, her answer simple, steady, and unshaken. "I know," she said, and in that answer, there was no need for anything more, because the meaning had already been carried in everything she had done. The warmth of the diner settled deeper the longer they sat, not just in the air, but in the way the space held them without question. The low hum of conversation blending with the soft clatter of dishes, creating a rhythm that felt steady and safe. Margaret's shoulders lowered inch by inch as if the tension she had carried for hours was slowly loosening its grip, her hands resting on the table now, one still lightly beneath Nia's, not needing to hold tightly anymore, just needing to know it was there. A waitress approached with a quiet smile, not overly bright, not forced, just kind. "Can I get you something warm?" she asked, her voice gentle. And for a brief moment Margaret hesitated, the old instinct rising again, the fear of asking, of taking. But before she could speak, Nia glanced at her, not interrupting, just offering a small nod, a silent permission that seemed to matter more than anything said out loud. "Tea, please," Margaret replied softly, her voice steadier than before. The waitress nodded and left without another word, not making it a moment, just part of the flow. The man leaned back slightly in his seat, his posture relaxed now, no longer unsure of his place, while the woman with the umbrella rested her hands around a cup of coffee that had already been set in front of her, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Margaret with a quiet attentiveness, not watching over her, just present. Nia shifted slightly in her seat, turning her body just enough to face Margaret more fully, her attention never drifting. "Do you remember your favorite song?" she asked suddenly. The question simple but unexpected. Margaret blinked, caught off guard, then looked down at the table, her fingers tracing a faint circle against the surface as if searching for the answer somewhere beneath it. "I used to play something for my students at the end of each lesson," she said slowly, her voice carrying a softness that had not been there before. "Just a few notes, nothing complicated, but it always made them stop talking." She paused, her lips curving faintly. "They would listen, really listen, even if it was just for a moment." Nia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe they felt what you were giving them," she said, and Margaret looked up at her, something in her gaze shifting again, deeper this time, not just recognition, but connection. The waitress returned with a small cup of tea, steam rising gently from its surface, placing it carefully in front of Margaret, who wrapped her hands around it almost immediately, the warmth seeping into her fingers, grounding, real. She took a slow sip, closing her eyes briefly as if absorbing more than just the heat around them. The diner continued its quiet rhythm, but at their table, something had changed again. The space no longer just a place to sit, but a place where something lost was beginning to return. Margaret set the cup down gently, her fingers lingering on its edge. "I do not know what happens next," she admitted, her voice calm but honest, not afraid, just uncertain. Nia did not hesitate, did not try to solve everything at once. She simply leaned a little closer, her voice soft but unwavering. "You do not have to know yet," she said, and the simplicity of it settled over the table like a quiet truth, not demanding answers, not rushing the moment forward, just allowing it to exist. And in that space, Margaret's shoulders eased again, her breath steady, her gaze no longer searching for an exit, but beginning, slowly, to accept that she did not need one right now. The tea cooled slowly between Margaret's hands, but she did not seem to notice, her fingers still wrapped around the cup as if the warmth had already traveled somewhere deeper than her skin, settling into a place that had been empty for too long. The quiet at the table was no longer fragile, it felt steady. Now, like something that could hold weight without breaking, Nia sat beside her, her presence unchanged, not restless, not distracted, just there in a way that felt rare. The man shifted slightly in his seat, glancing toward the window where the last traces of rain slid down the glass in thin, fading lines. "It is getting late," he said softly, not as a warning, just acknowledging the time. The woman with the umbrella nodded faintly, her eyes returning to Margaret, waiting, always waiting for her to lead now instead of deciding for her. Margaret looked down at the table again, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface, and for a moment she seemed to study it, as if seeing herself clearly for the first time that night. "I had a son," she said quietly, the words coming without preparation, without build-up, just truth. The table stilled around her, not in shock, but in attention. "He told me he would take care of everything," she continued, her voice even, but something beneath it shifted, not pain exactly, more like understanding. "I believed him," she added, her thumb tracing the rim of the cup slowly. Nia did not interrupt, did not fill the space. She simply listened, her eyes steady. Margaret exhaled softly, her shoulders lowering just a little more. "When I arrived today, they said my name was not on the list anymore," she said, her gaze lifting slightly, not searching for sympathy, just sharing what had happened. The man's expression tightened for a moment, his jaw shifting as if he wanted to respond but chose not to. The woman with the umbrella looked down at her coffee, her grip around the cup firming, the weight of the words settling quietly over the table. Nia tilted her head slightly, absorbing every part of it, then leaned a little closer, her voice soft but certain. "That does not mean you do not belong somewhere," she said, and the simplicity of it cut through everything else. Margaret blinked, her eyes meeting Nia's, something in her expression shifting again, not confusion, not disbelief, but recognition, as if the idea itself was new but somehow already true. "You speak like you know that," Margaret said, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. Nia gave a small shrug, her gaze never breaking. "I just know people should not be left behind," she replied, and there was no hesitation in it, no need to explain further. The truth of it sat plainly between them. The man leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his voice calmer now, more grounded. "We can figure something out tonight," he said, not offering a quick fix, just a step. The woman with the umbrella nodded in agreement, her presence steady, but again, no one rushed Margaret. No one pushed her to decide. They simply gave her the space to exist within the moment. Margaret looked down at her hands again, then slowly turned one over, placing it fully over Nia's, not holding tightly, just resting there, her fingers no longer trembling. "I thought I was done being needed," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else, and Nia responded without pause, her voice gentle but unwavering. "You are not." And in that quiet exchange, something settled. Not everything, not the whole story, but enough to change the direction of it, enough to make the next step feel possible. And for the first time since she had sat alone in the rain, Margaret did not look like someone waiting for an ending. She looked like someone standing at the beginning of something she had not expected to find again. The quiet at the table did not break. It shifted, deepening into something that carried weight without pressure. Like everyone understood that what came next mattered more than anything said before. Margaret's hand remained over Nia's, not asking, not holding on out of fear, but choosing to stay connected. Her eyes moved slowly across the small group, taking them in one by one, not as strangers anymore, but as people who had stepped into her story without knowing where it would lead. The man exhaled softly, leaning back just enough to give her space while still being present. "There is a place a few miles from here," he said carefully, his tone thoughtful. "Not a shelter, more like a small home for seniors. They keep a few open rooms for situations like this." He paused, watching her reaction, not pushing, just offering. The woman with the umbrella nodded slightly, adding gently, "I know someone who volunteers there. They are kind. They listen." Her voice carried quiet confidence, not selling an idea, just sharing something real. Margaret listened, her gaze lowering to the table again, her fingers tracing the edge of the cup slowly, considering, not rejecting, not accepting, just weighing what it meant to step into something new after being turned away so recently. Nia remained still beside her, her presence unchanged, not urging her forward, not pulling her back, simply there as a constant. "We can go see it," Nia said softly after a moment, her voice calm, grounded. "You do not have to stay if it does not feel right." The words settled differently, not as a solution, but as permission to choose, something Margaret had not been given earlier that day. She looked up at Nia, her expression thoughtful, searching, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, not with certainty, but with willingness, and that was enough. The man gave a small, relieved breath, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet acknowledgement that they had taken a step forward. The woman with the umbrella reached for her bag, already preparing without making it a moment. The waitress returned briefly, placing a small napkin beside Margaret's cup without interrupting the flow, a silent gesture that felt like part of the same quiet care that had been building all night. Margaret released her hand from the cup, letting it rest again over Nia's for a brief second before slowly pulling away, not breaking the connection, just shifting it into something less dependent, more balanced. She straightened slightly in her seat, her posture more aligned than before, as if the decision itself had given her something back. "I will try," she said quietly, her voice steady, and the simplicity of it carried more strength than any promise could have. Nia smiled faintly, not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to show she had heard it, understood it. The man stood first, giving them space to rise without rushing. The woman with the umbrella followed, stepping aside just enough to clear the path, and as Margaret stood again, her movements were slower than before but more certain, her balance steady without needing to lean as heavily. Nia rose beside her, close but not holding, allowing Margaret to take her own step first, and when she did, it was small, but it was hers. They moved toward the door together, the bell chiming softly again as they stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the pavement clean and reflective, the street quieter than before, as if it had settled with them. And as they began walking again, this time with direction, not just movement, Margaret's steps did not waver the same way, because for the first time that night, she was not being led away from something. She was choosing where to go next. The night air felt different when they stepped outside again, not warmer, not brighter, but clearer, like something had shifted in a way that could not be seen, but could be felt with every step they took. The streetlights stretched long reflections across the damp pavement, guiding their path forward in quiet lines of gold and white. Margaret walked at the center now, not because anyone placed her there, but because she naturally settled into it, her posture more upright than before, her steps still careful but no longer uncertain. The man walked slightly ahead, glancing back occasionally to make sure the pace felt right, while the woman with the umbrella stayed close, her presence steady and calm, and Nia remained just beside Margaret, not holding her hand this time, but close enough that the connection did not need to be physical to remain strong. They walked for a few minutes in silence, not awkward, not empty, but full of everything that had already been said. and everything that did not need to be. Margaret looked around as they passed storefronts now closed for the night, their dark windows reflecting faint images of the group moving together. And for a brief moment, she caught her own reflection among them. Not alone, not forgotten, but part of something again. She slowed slightly, her gaze lingering on the glass before returning forward. "I used to walk home after late lessons," she said softly, her voice steady. "Sometimes I would stay at the school until it was quiet, just to listen to the halls without noise." She let out a small breath, not sad, just remembering. "I never thought I would miss that kind of quiet." Nia glanced up at her, her expression thoughtful. "This quiet feels different," she said simply, and Margaret nodded, understanding without needing explanation. The kind of quiet that comes from being alone is not the same as the quiet that comes from being seen. They turned down a smaller street, the traffic fading behind them, the sound of the city softening into something distant, and ahead, a building came into view, modest, not grand, but warmly lit, with a small sign near the entrance and a soft glow spilling from the windows. The man slowed his steps, turning slightly toward Margaret. "This is the place," he said gently, not presenting it as an answer, just an option. Margaret paused, her eyes resting on the building, taking it in slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the hoodie still draped over her shoulders, as if grounding herself in the moment. The woman with the umbrella stepped a little closer, her voice quiet but reassuring. "We can go in together," she offered, and Margaret looked at her, then at Nia, her gaze steady now, not searching, just acknowledging. Nia gave a small nod, not pushing her forward, just standing with her, and after a moment, Margaret took a step toward the entrance. The movement deliberate, chosen, not forced. They walked up the short path together, the soft light from inside growing warmer with each step. And when they reached the door, Margaret paused again, her hand hovering near the handle, not out of fear, but because she understood that this step mattered. It was not just about going inside. It was about allowing herself to try again, to trust again, and for a brief second, she glanced at Nia, and Nia met her gaze with the same quiet certainty she had carried from the very beginning. No words, no pressure, just presence, and that was enough. Margaret took a slow breath, then gently pushed the door open, stepping forward into the light, not as someone being placed somewhere, but as someone choosing not to disappear. The warmth inside the building wrapped around them the moment the door closed behind. Not overwhelming, not sudden, just steady, like a place that had been holding space quietly long before they arrived. The soft hum of conversation drifted through the hallway, low and calm, accompanied by the faint scent of clean linens and something gently cooked. Margaret stepped just inside and paused, not frozen, but present, her eyes moving slowly across the room, taking in the small details. A chair neatly placed near a window, a stack of folded blankets on a nearby table, a lamp casting a soft glow in the corner. Nothing extravagant, nothing imposing, just simple, intentional, and welcoming. The man stepped in beside her, his voice low, respectful of the quiet. "We can talk to someone at the desk," he said, gesturing toward a small reception area where a woman stood reviewing a clipboard, her posture relaxed, her presence calm. The woman with the umbrella gave Margaret a gentle nod, encouraging, but not pushing, while Nia remained close, just a step behind, allowing Margaret to move forward on her own. And after a brief moment, Margaret did, her steps measured but steady, her hand brushing lightly along the edge of the counter as she approached, grounding herself in the reality of the moment. The woman behind the desk looked up, her expression softening instantly, not surprised, not alarmed, just aware. "Good evening," she said warmly, her tone even. "How can I help you tonight?" And the question hung there, open, patient, without pressure. Margaret inhaled slowly, her shoulders lifting slightly before settling again, and for a moment it seemed like she might not speak. But then her voice came, quiet but clear. "I was told there might be a place here," she said, her words careful, as if placing them one by one. The woman behind the desk nodded gently, already listening, already understanding. "There is," she replied, her voice steady. "We always keep space for those who need it." And something in that answer landed differently, not just the words, but the certainty behind them. the absence of hesitation. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly against the counter before easing. Again, her gaze lowering for a brief second before lifting once more. The man stepped back just enough to give her room. The woman with the umbrella remained nearby, her presence quiet and supportive, and Nia stood where she was, her eyes on Margaret, not guiding, not intervening, just witnessing. The woman at the desk reached for a form, sliding it gently across the counter. "We can take care of everything step by step," she said, her tone reassuring without being overwhelming. "There is no rush." Margaret looked down at the paper, then back up, her eyes meeting the woman's, and for the first time that night, there was no uncertainty in her gaze, only a quiet readiness. "Thank you," she said softly, the words simple but full, and as she reached for the pen, her hand did not tremble, the movement steady, deliberate, chosen. Behind her, the small group remained still, not watching for an outcome, not waiting for a resolution, just present, because this moment was not about them anymore. It was about Margaret stepping forward into something new, something she had almost lost the chance to find. And as the pen touched the paper, marking the beginning of a new line, it was not just a form being filled out, it was a life being continued, one choice, one steady breath at a time. The pen moved slowly across the paper, each letter forming with care, not rushed, not uncertain, just deliberate, as if Margaret understood that this moment deserved her full presence. The quiet around the desk remained undisturbed, the soft hum of the building continuing in the background, steady and reassuring. When she finished writing her name, she paused for a brief second, her hand resting lightly on the page, her eyes tracing the ink as if confirming it was real, as if reminding herself that she was still here, still able to begin again. The woman behind the desk offered a gentle nod, taking the form with calm efficiency. "We will get you settled into a room tonight," she said, her voice warm but grounded. "You can rest, and we will take care of everything else tomorrow." Margaret listened, her shoulders easing once more, not because everything was solved, but because something had shifted into place, something steady enough to stand on. She turned slightly, looking back toward the small group who had walked in with her, her gaze lingering on each of them for a moment, but stopping at Nia, the connection between them unchanged even without touch. Margaret stepped closer, her movements quiet but intentional, and reached out, her hand gently finding Nia's again, not to hold on this time, but to acknowledge, to thank, to close the distance in a way words alone could not. "You stayed," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying more strength than before. Nia met her gaze, her expression calm, almost simple. "You needed someone," she replied, the same truth she had carried from the beginning, unchanged, unwavering. Margaret's lips curved into a small smile, fuller now, not fragile, not fading, but present. She released Nia's hand slowly, not breaking the connection, just letting it settle into something deeper, something that would remain even without contact. The man gave a quiet nod, his posture relaxed, no longer unsure, while the woman with the umbrella offered a soft smile, her eyes warm, as if she understood the weight of what had just taken place. The receptionist gestured gently toward a hallway. "I will show you your room," she said, and Margaret turned toward it, her steps steady, her pace unhurried. As she walked, she passed a small upright piano positioned near the corner of the room, its surface polished but worn in places, the keys just visible beneath a closed cover. She paused for a moment, her hand lifting slightly, hovering just above it, not touching, just acknowledging, a quiet recognition passing through her. Then she continued forward, following the receptionist down the hallway, her figure gradually moving out of view, not disappearing, but transitioning, stepping into something new. The door at the end of the hall opened softly, then closed behind her, and the space she left behind did not feel empty, it felt complete. Nia remained where she stood for a moment longer, her gaze resting on the hallway, not waiting, not expecting anything in return, just present. The man exhaled quietly, glancing toward the door before stepping back. The woman with the umbrella adjusted her coat, her posture calm, and slowly, without needing to speak, they turned toward the exit, stepping back out into the night. The air now clear, the streets quiet, and though the city continued as it always had, Something had changed, not everywhere, not for everyone, but in one small place, in one quiet moment, a hand had reached out, and because of it, someone who had almost been forgotten was no longer invisible. She was seen, she was heard, and for the first time in a long while, she was home.